Hello, everyone. This is Ryan Kelly, AMT's General Manager of the San Francisco Tech Lab and resident supply chain nerd. Thanks for joining us for today's Supply Chain Focus. We're so lucky to be joined by Jennifer Herron, who is the founder and CEO of Action Engineering. Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Ryan. Thank you.
I think anybody that knows anything about model-based definition probably knows Jennifer, has heard her name. But she is I think maybe the person in the industry that's like most involved on this issue, been involved with the standards committees for 13 years, pushing this forward, also working directly with companies to really understand how they can actually change business results by using this really exciting technology. And in fact, she wrote the book on MBD. In fact, she was just showing it to me if you want to hold it up. So is this available now?
Almost. This is literally the proof copy from Amazon that you see, and so we're just in the final throes of making that happen with Amazon.
Okay, well, let me know when it comes out because I'm definitely gonna order it.
Sure.
And so, Jennifer, you've got a presentation for us today, but we're not going to sit here and let you give the whole thing. We're actually going to try to have a discussion the whole way through. And I would encourage our audience members to also submit questions as they come to you. We'll get to some at the end, but I think to the extent that we can incorporate them in the conversation that we're having, that would be really great. So here are your bona fides here, I see. We actually had to get you to cut this down to just one page, but no, just kidding. Okay, well, let's jump right into it, Jennifer. What are we going to learn about today?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Well, I wanted to bring model-based definition to you within the context of the supply chain because it is of very strong importance. But I'll tell you first a little bit about Action Engineering. We enable digital transformations, and we do that by empowering model-based visionaries to make radical improvements by championing people with our technical expertise, inspiration, and grit. We like to think we're building a resilient future that is centered on connected, trusted models and an uplifted workforce. Everything we do at Action Engineering leverages practices that are applicable in any CAD and PLM tool suite. So we like to call ourselves CAD agnostic. So I'll start at the 30,000-foot level, Ryan. To leverage big benefits of Industry 4.0, digital twin, model-based enterprise, it is important to focus your conversations about your digital transformation on MBD. Now, MBD is model-based definition, and this is a documentation technique that captures the product definition requirements inside dynamic 3D data sets, rather than how they're communicated today through a static 2D drawing. So I've got some advice for suppliers when they are tackling MBD. There are 5 key concepts to keep in mind when starting down the MBD road. 1, foundational model-based definition capabilities are required. Once that MBD is in place, then automation is possible, and so is increased traceability. We can also reduce the cost of poor quality, and this one's my favorite. And once you can do all those things, you're gonna need some updated tools and some upskilled people. So for the supplier, the most beneficial byproduct of MBD is to avoid the cost of poor quality during information exchange. So from our work with over about 30 companies, different organizations, we have analyzed that there are 6 to 20 manual handoffs during any one OEM to supplier interaction for just a single product, like one radio or one pump. So Ryan, that's a whole lot of manual handoffs going on, leaving a whole lot of room for error. So anything we can do to eliminate manual handoffs helps to reduce that cost of poor quality.
And so, like on this slide, for example, you're saying it's like what suppliers need to know about
Yeah.
MBD. Why start the conversation here? Why not with what OEMs need to know about MBD?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, really, both OEMs and supply chain needs to know this, but I think for suppliers, this is really intimidating because they're really slammed for time constantly, and so taking on a new initiative is really tricky. So these are just the key pain points and areas that the suppliers can leverage to make incremental savings and keep their business running at the same time.
Got it.
So, and to your point, when both the OEMs and suppliers are invested in MBD, then we see change happen. So there's real stuff going on at the suppliers, and I think this is something, and maybe this is a message from me to advocate for the suppliers to the OEMs. We have to honor and figure out how to overcome these two messages so that your suppliers can be successful with MBD. The first one is most suppliers are just flat out busy keeping the lights on. And we hear pain points like our customers are complicated and we're behind on all our deliveries and we're overloaded dealing with quality escapes. So seriously, you want me to do something new? It's hard.
Mhm.
The second thing we hear is all around cost challenges. It's always top of mind. The messages we hear are, we can't afford to invest in new tools and methods. They're high product and warranty costs. Budgets are locked down and operation costs have increased.
Mhm.
So if the OEMs can help suppliers, then there's a win-win scenario on both sides.
I see. I mean, it's part of what you're saying here is that the reality is that MBD can actually alleviate all of these challenges, but it's the switching costs that are so high and sort
Yeah,
of the intimidation factor of doing something new that they might not take it on, or they just might not have the bandwidth to be able to incorporate it into what they're doing.
right.
But this is an area where their partners in the supply chain, their buyers could who are like, let's face it, the reason that there are these cost challenges and these challenges, a lot of them are coming down from above. They're sort of operating in this environment as a result of the expectations and the pressures that are put on them by their buyers. It
Right.
seems like for both sides to be able to have more wiggle room to drive more benefit to keep those costs down and to keep performance up, they could look at looking at how they can use MBD together.
And that's spot on. So in with the suppliers and OEMs that we've helped on both sides, the suppliers have come to the table saying, you know what, we want to do this MBD thing. We want to accept your MBD data. We need some help though, and we want to give you real live feedback to make your processes better, so that we get what we need and then you get exactly what you need. And when that happens, that's when the magic happens, is when those conversations occur.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, and this drives into this point, which is over years, we have created these findings about how MBD can help alleviate pain points. These findings are universal to every supplier. The first one is really around data interoperability. And it is just really challenging because a supplier often has to ingest a whole bunch of different proprietary CAD formats, all of them, and then they
Right.
have to own one themselves. So with MBD, alongside both ANSI and ISO standards, so we're covering America and European markets, the data flows a whole lot better. The next point is data accuracy is a real concern. Often suppliers don't trust the drawings and the models they receive from the OEMs. I've been in conversations with the supply chain and they go, you don't ever give us the right data. And when you give us data, 2 months later, you change it. So we started building
Mhm.
stuff and what we built was wrong.
Yeah.
So what we're discovering is that when the OEM has a robust and repeatable MBD process, then the suppliers trust the data. So some of this has to do with MBD, and some of this has to do with leveraging, just using MBD as an initiative to make your data process and information exchange processes more robust.
Mm-hmm.
That drives us into the next point, which is that product requirements are often inconsistent from even just a single customer to a single supplier. So if a supplier has 100 customers and they're getting 100 different data flavors, it's really, really hard to figure out. So it's all just kind of a random, I can curse on this, Ryan, right? Shit show.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's just a mess. So having any structure in that is really good. So what we find is MBD often highlights drawing-based process inconsistencies and then can help to overcome those process inconsistencies because we're putting a more robust process in place. So keeping on top of changes is very tedious for everybody, both sides, OEM, supplier. So having a method to automate the creation and the traceability of changes, and then the collaboration and feedback loops, that's a really important value that can be added through using model-based definition data.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, budget and schedule, always top in mind for any supplier. But, you know, I'm a small business. These guys are small businesses. Budget and schedule is always top of mind because if you bust it, you're done. You haven't made any profit. So we have found mutual cost savings benefits for both the OEM and the supplier. Supplier spends less money building it, mostly because the data is right the first time. And the OEM can then ask for cost reductions in the part costs. And we've seen that around 30 to 40% in part cost reductions.
I mean, one thing that I'm getting from, you know, looking at the information on this slide is that these things are actually all very interrelated to one another.
Yeah,
these are not, I mean, each one of these things is sort of its distinct challenge.
Yeah.
But MBD sort of addresses sort of all of these things, not so much individually,
right,
but on the whole. So accuracy requirements and change control, for example, using I don't want to call it a paper-based workflow, but using static PDFs, it's essentially the same type of thing where you're sort of, you know, having to sort of make this one-to-one you know, association. You're
right.
like, well, it's the issue is on this piece of this document. I need to circle it. I need to communicate it with you. And that is like a very slow feedback loop that impacts the change order, impacts the budget and schedule. I kind of had this idea, whereas if they have all of the suppliers, right? Because with this last couple of slides that has been showing is like what the potential upside of using MBD would be for the suppliers. Like a thought experiment where every supplier said, they all banded together and they said, we're not going to do business with any of you anymore unless you're using MBD.
It's a good idea.
Well, it's a good idea, but it's hard to pull off, and the power balance is really not sort of like going in that direction. But
well, yeah, because they're just trying to keep the lights on. So why would they try to collaborate with another supplier who might be their competitor, by the way?
Why would they want to collaborate with their peers and competitors? Right. They don't have the time or the wherewithal to be able, or the infrastructure to be able to do that.
Right.
But the other thing is that, you know, they're always running the risk of saying, oh, hey, we only work with buyers that give us MBD now. Like that's a real risk that they're going to run.
It's a real risk, yeah.
But why I think it's a useful thought experiment is because sure, the sort of the suppliers benefit from that, because all of the things that you have listed as risks right here, they're also a huge pain in the supplier's ass right now too.
For sure.
And so yes, there is the ability for the suppliers themselves to have less pain, but the net benefit is to the buyer.
Right.
Because they're going to be able to get their products on budget, on schedule, with a higher degree of quality, with a lot less back and forth than they're getting it today.
Right.
So it's everything that you said so far is like really obvious. What's not so obvious is why it's not happening, and really who has the ability to sort of push it in that direction and get away from some of the crummy way that people are doing things today.
Yeah. So, I mean, your big question is why? Why is this not happening more than it is today? Because there's some obvious advantages. I think it probably all comes down to cost, and it comes down to what we call kind of the middle management layer. That happens on the OEM side. It also happens on the supplier side. Although our observation is that the suppliers, and they're typically companies that are less than about 200 people, and even much smaller than 200 people, they're actually far more flexible, and they'll take risks because that's kind of how they do business anyway, is being risky. So,
Right.
but there's this big sort of subcontext to the bigger enterprise picture for big companies around supply chains. And I mean, things like asking for, 60-day terms to pay their suppliers, stuff like that's a real problem. So if you can say, guess what, 60 days, we know that's a real big problem because basically, we're holding onto your cash and making money off of it.
Right.
What if you did MBD, gave us a cost cutting method, and we'll make your terms 30 days. So the OEMs are incentivizing the suppliers. But I don't see a lot of supply chain managers really going out on a limb to make that happen at the big enterprises. So I might put that back on them and say, you've got to find out real business advantages to the supply chain and understand their business model. I mean, they have a business model for a reason, to make your parts the way you need them at a reduced cost of you making them. That's why you do it in the first place.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. And it not written in the business model is that we're going to play bank for you.
No.
And not written in their business model is that, we're going to try to guess and interpret when you give us conflicting information. But it's not like what we're talking about here is just circumstantial and every now and then. It's pretty commonplace.
Yeah, and I'll make one more point on the big why question, Ryan. Why are we not adopting this? What we've seen at a practical and pragmatic level is the big enterprises are putting out requirements that are a little bit nonsensical and contradictory. That goes right down to the model-based definition requirements that they're asking for when they're doing these new initiatives, to just material properties, right? So any clarity that could be brought to be pragmatic, to be specific always, and have less back and forth in the feedback loop, I think that's really what we're trying to drive into here. So can I talk about people a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the things that we say is we try to bring the people to the technology, because like you say, there's lots of technology out there. What we're struggling with is people actually adopting the technology. So through our research, we've identified 4 cohorts that categorize the people that exist in any manufacturing enterprise, whether it's at the supplier or internal manufacturing at a large enterprise. And what this does is it allows us to build processes and education materials with careful consideration for the different roles and skill sets. So at a typical supplier, just use that as our example since we're focused on supply chain, we have authors, practitioners, consumers, and conversers. The authors are often folks like tooling designers, manufacturing engineers, quality engineers, and these are folks that need to author instructions using 3D data or CAD files. And so the second group we call the practitioner group. And this is made up of the purchaser, contracting agent, customer liaison, product manager, and it also includes subject matter experts in operations such as CNC and CMM programmers. So this group has to use and interpret the 3D data, but they don't necessarily have to author it. Then the consumer information cohort are those roles that need to read MBD data as they would read a drawing today. And examples of those consumers are machinists, assembly technicians, and inspectors. And last but not least, and perhaps the most important, is the cohort of the conversers. This is a group that is very important to the success of MBD. And these folks need to know about MBD, but they don't need to know how to read it. They just need to know how to advocate for it. And this group includes plant managers, quality managers, shop foremans, etc. And Ryan, I think this is where we see the most blockage is in this converser group, because I just don't get it. And it's not really because they're not smart enough to get it, because that's certainly not the case. These are always really, really smart people. It's that model-based definition is really, really nuanced. And everybody they've got in their organization typically becomes an expert in MBD, and then they can't get past the expert dilemma of communication, where all they want to do is, let me tell you exactly what the annotation is for this tiny little surface here. And the converser's like, I don't care. Tell me how much it's going to cost and what my risk is, right? I think that's some of the conflict that we see.
Yeah, I think, more generally, and something that, we at AMT think a lot about is this issue that there's a lot of really great technology out there. We call it emerging technology. In some other industries, they call it well-established technology, right? I mean, AI, machine learning is one of these things where it's just starting to be sort of accepted and used for worthwhile purposes in our industry. In other industries, it's been around for a decade or more and sort of used to great effect. What is it that's going to take? And I think this is, relative to the conversation of MBD, but enter other compelling technology here that's going to get these conversers. And I really like the way that you've defined this cohort, where those are largely the ones that are influencing the decision-making process. The ones to the left of the conversers, they're not. They're just doing it. Yeah. And yet it's really, there's this need to get these people who really to understand what the business impact could be, to evaluate the potential risks and whether or not the high switching costs are going to be worth it. But yeah, I think that this is a really insightful slide to be able to really emphasize the fact that we can't just rely on sort of the nerds to.
You need them. You need the nerds.
Well, you need them, but it's really how do you get the sort of the, not just the nerd's boss, but the nerd's boss's boss to really care about this technology and what it can do at an operational level.
Yeah, and if I may, there's a nuance that I often hear, and that's kind of what we're getting at with this converser cohort. All of the best practice to date for any digital transformation, number one thing, get an executive champion. Great. You get an executive champion. They're often extremely intelligent people. They don't get there by being stupid. So they pick this stuff up really fast, right? The challenge is the executive champion's way up here at the 30,000 foot level. And we're talking about, what color variation are the trees down here. And that's where these conversers come in and have to start making decisions about, what colors the trees are going to be, and, how that's going to grow up in the organization. And they're making day-to-day decisions, but there's often a mismatch gap between the risk they're willing to take, either because of their own job, or, they don't get paid as much as the top level executive and things like that. So again, I think we're creating conflict by saying, okay, you need an executive champion and you need subject matter experts. And that's sort of the why it's not happening, is because we didn't hit that middle layer of communication exchange.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, one thing that you called out, there needs to be this alignment of incentives as well.
Yep.
They really need to make sure that if someone is willing to risk their reputation on something,
Yep.
but they understand that, like with a technology like MBD, for example, that there could be very high rewards, that it's going to be worth it for them to stick their neck out.
Right.
That it's not just that there needs to be this kind of like a supportive environment for that level of operational risk changing when there are those dividends that can be generated as a result.
Yeah, and I think the point stands about incentives, aligning incentives that make sense at every level.
Including through the supply chain, right?
Yeah. I mean, you need to make incentives for the supply chain, but now if you go into the supply chain, how are those executives of the supply chain and conversers going to incentivize the manufacturing engineers, the purchasing, data exchange people, the machinists and the technicians? How do they do that? What is it that makes those people tick? And that's what we've been researching, because we found that once we do that, we really know these people better, and then we can say, here's what's in it for you. Yeah. Cool. Well, the next topic I have is really about opportunities and concerns, and how that looks a little bit different across the cohorts. So if you can keep those diamond colors in mind from the previous slide, down in the bottom left-hand corner, I left you a legend because I don't remember the colors always myself. I'll walk you through a common list of benefits and concerns when it comes to MBD implementation. So in general, the practitioners, and these are the green diamonds, they may see more benefits, like 3D data is easy to read and it's connected through the enterprise. While the conversers, our middle management layer, may have more concerns such as expenses and time to implement MBD and the difficulty of cultural change. And I think there's something we just unpacked, Ryan, too, which is the risk. Their tolerance for risk is different than practitioners, authors, and even the executive level. So I think that's a key point. But we know these conversers hold the purse strings, so it's really important to address their concerns.
Yeah, this is really interesting slide. Yeah.
I'll pop back.
No, you don't have to. We can move on. We got plenty to discuss.
Yeah, it's just, we hear these things over and over and over again, and our customers are so cute. They think they're unique. I'm like, well, yeah, you and the next supplier and the guy before you all have the exact same pain points.
Well, I mean, just on that point, their challenges may not be unique, but would really set some companies apart, or really how they decide to deal with those challenges.
Yeah, and you know what I think is an interesting trend as well? I was conferring with a colleague of mine in a big commercial industry that's doing an MBD transformation, and he's like, oh, the strategy, everybody thinks that's a bunch of intellectual property. And I'm like, meh, I don't think the strategy is so much intellectual property as the how do you deal with people day to day and get them motivated to do what they need to do. Like that, to me, that's the hard part. That is what you should hold tight. How you keep your culture, how you motivate your culture, that is a competitive advantage. It's my 2 cents on it.
Well, you're right. And I think that's maybe the importance of culture, and what does it signal to these cohorts sort of within your organization, within your supply chain, about your sort of wherewithal to really walk the walk when it comes to investing in the practices and technology that are going to move everybody in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think there's some statistics coming out now, Ryan, and maybe one of our listeners could do some research and poke it back at us. But there's some research coming out now that says that we've kind of maxed out lean manufacturing iterative benefits. And what we need to focus on now is around culture renovation and working on getting the people to be more efficient. And I think that often that point around people gets lost in these big technology, sexy, AR, VR, AI, ML, it's like there's all these sexy technology things, but I'm like, yeah, but if the people don't use the technology, what's the point? So, it's something that we've got to pay attention to if you really try to get the next level of savings beyond what you're doing today with like lean manufacturing.
Well, the whole, in some sense, the lean manufacturing philosophy is somewhat esoteric, right? Because it is never ending, right? It's
Right.
always continual improvement. But
Right.
one would say that perhaps that at a certain point there are diminishing returns. There's only so much improvement that can be made where you really start noticing it. I think that
Right.
kind of mindset is like very important, and it obviously is can be very impactful, and has obviously been really impactful in sort of like the whole history of modern manufacturing.
Absolutely.
But the sort of it still leaves the point of where are we going to have this sort of big impact now? And one thing that I'm personally really interested in, and AMT is just now part of a supply chain consortium that's really looking at responsiveness and agility and speed.
Key.
And the technology that we're talking here, MBD, when you look at its ability to minimize the amount of time spent in these feedback loops, it does that. When
Right.
you look at its ability to enable collaboration between buyers and suppliers,
Right.
and get them operating from a single source of truth, incorporating all the process steps from design through manufacturing through inspection,
Yep.
using sort of like the same thing. The end result of that is more speed. There's also lots of sort of more obvious opportunities for cost savings, but it's just faster. And that, I think, is really is something that, if it's true what I think, that supply chains are going to be less cost oriented and
Right.
more interested in their ability to respond more dynamically to changes in the marketplace and flex their supply chain up or down as a result of that.
Right.
MBD really seems like it can be an invaluable tool. In fact, probably won't be as possible to do it without that type of digital thread running through the supply chain.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about 2020, because mostly I hated 2020, is that we just did a giant grand experiment that nobody would ever have taken the risk of in the supply chain. We
You're right.
said, holy crap, we need more PPEs. Holy crap, we need way more respirators than we have. Go make them faster. So we have all of this data sort of sitting out there waiting to be data mined, again,
Yeah.
for our data mining listeners. It's a huge experiment that just happened. And we really need to go back and look at that, because the things that I know from my work is around resiliency, agility, flexibility, responsiveness, reducing feedback loops. I mean, those are the big, big key concepts. That's where the cost and time savings is going to come out of in the supply chain as we progress forward over time, because there's only so much material eking out percentage of cents you can do, like with topology optimization and stuff, which is all also cool and great and sexy as well. But there's this big picture about making all those feedback loops tight, which is really all a digital transformation is, right?
I think
And I
that's a
don't
good
care
way.
what you call it either. Yeah.
It's make those feedback loops tight
Yep.
and fast.
Tight and fast. Yep, exactly. So, and that's all we're talking about. We argue about terms and definitions all day long, every day, as MBD nerds. So, well, let's take a look at two personalities that likely exist at a supplier. Meet Fred. He has spent 34 years assembling parts for multiple customers. He's good at it, but engineering drawings can't include every view he needs. And he has to ask a lot of questions that slow him down. So there's John, Fred's plant manager, who was worried about MBD because Fred is pretty great at his job now. So he wonders if Fred can adapt to using 3D data. Real stories. So when Fred gets to use a 3D assembly with PMI, he is thrilled because he can rotate the model to see exactly what he needs. He feels faster, more accurate, and he doesn't have to talk to those pesky engineers, which we know he doesn't really want to do anyway. And then John, he's empowered and excited that Fred loves this 3D data and wants to work on more 3D-based projects. John's customers are getting even better quality and the work gets done faster. So yes, that's what we're talking about.
So the title of this slide is build a plan with small wins. And I definitely can understand this use cases like the assembly where a drawing doesn't really convey all that information, or it's harder to interpret.
Right.
The other thing is that it's a skill to be able to set up a 3D drawing in a way that's going to convey the right information downstream. A lot of times the designers themselves, they don't have that, they might not understand how that drawing is going to be used downstream. So it seems like an obvious benefit to be able to provide anybody who needs it with all the information that they could possibly need and have it in this single source of truth.
Exactly. And I want to walk back to, it's a great segue into this next slide. And I kind of promised to tell the listeners what the MBD foundational capabilities are. Because your point you're getting to, Ryan, is what are the capabilities we can build on and how can we incrementally do it? This is how we keep folks from being totally overwhelmed. So here they are. Here are the capabilities that I want you to have in the supply chain in order to have MBD success. These are 9 capabilities to realize the full MBD benefit. There will always be more emerging every day. You'll notice I didn't put VR and AR on there. I think that's a maturing technology for the future. So when we kind of find the guiding suppliers to implement MBD, this is even this 9 is overwhelming. And again, imagine there's probably really 30 to 40 capabilities out there revolving around 3D data. So I always recommend start with one capability and build the others as you go, iterating it along the way. So often our clients start with quoting and processing 3D data where they have been able to see up to a 70% time savings. That's a 7-0, by the way, 70% time savings. And the next step is often just to create 3D work instructions. Lots of tools out there for that. And then third, your tooling designers probably are already using some 3D data, but what the models they receive today are often totally chaotically authored and they're non-standard. So this is an opportunity to leverage a technique many of your tool designers are probably already doing. And MBD gives you the structure to codify a robust, repeatable process for designing tools, fixtures, and gauges. So then once you've got kind of these basic internal capabilities, quoting, processing, 3D work instructions, tool and design, then you can go work with your OEMs, your customers, on what is their desired validation methods, how do they want their data reported,
right?
What are the collaboration methods they want to do, what's the portal look like, all that kind of stuff.
It seems like the ones that you've highlighted are the ones that say to the supplier, just by adopting these capabilities, you're going to save time and money.
Yeah.
And in the case of the quoting, probably make more money since you're going to be quoting, you're going to be turning around those quotes faster. That generally leads to more wins because buyers always want that answer now.
Yep.
But it also means that you're going to be able to swing at more opportunities, and you're probably going to hit more from that respect too. So not
Yep.
only are you sort of saving money because of efficiency, but you're also putting yourselves in a position where you can make more money because you're going to have a more efficient quoting process.
Right.
But the other ones that aren't highlighted that you mentioned, it seems like those are the areas where there's additional value because of the supply chain relationship, with your buyers, because of taking advantage of that capability to use the model as a single source of truth for means of collaboration. So you're not taking screenshots and marking them up and sending them back and forth in email and things like that.
I think that's a great observation and definitely true. You're right. That's the feedback loop group, that next one.
Well, I'm sold. You sold me.
That's cool. I want to leave you with a bit of advice here, because we talked a lot about technologies and people, but understanding the people in your organization really makes or breaks technical projects. So organizations that succeed in this extremely complex transition, don't kid yourself, this isn't simple, this is complex. They take the time and the effort to integrate cultural as well as technological changes. This certainly applies to all organizations. My key advice for suppliers is plan pilots carefully, train according to the needs of the people, and then communicate and create paths for feedback. And that feedback loop, basically what you said, Ryan, it's all about, tightening those up. Little bit of a retrospective here, looking back 10 years, there is a definitive need to engage the supply chain in your digital transformation plans. And rather than me just telling you it's so, I went out and found some data on this. In 2011, companies shifted from buying 50% of their parts from suppliers to buying 80% of their parts from suppliers. So this is a really key metric that tells us that it's really important to focus on the supply chain. That's why we're having this webinar here anyway, right?
Well, that just, no one, I saw a statistic that, said that in 2020, there was some like AI that they used to analyze, I think 1,000 earning calls, like with CEOs.
Yeah.
And supply chain was the #2 mentioned phrase.
Wow. And what year was that?
That was 2020.
That was 2020.
As a result of COVID. But really, supply chain is sort of seen as this is also, I think, one of the main problems, not thought about enough. It's seen as a cost center. It's seen as, something that needs to be reduced and not like a critical part of the business, as like how you actually make money.
No, don't reduce them, support them, enable them, empower them. I mean, that's your job as the original equipment manufacturer.
Yeah, that's an interesting statistic.
Yeah, it's a good one. All right, so in 2016, we start to see a call for MBD interoperability using STEP AP242 for you MBD nerds.
Tell us what that is, because this is actually something that I wanted to make earlier when you said interoperability, because a lot of people might think I need some kind of special tool to take advantage of MBD, but that's not really true. So tell us about sort of like where we are with this standard, where it's going to go, and sort of what it's what you need to sort of be able to get started with it, because a lot of people don't know that they might already have the capability to use it today.
Yeah, well, okay, so the STEP standard is, first of all, it's an ISO standard, so it's an international standard. It has been in existence for over 20 years. It started out really focused on geometry and how do we translate geometry from one CAD system to another. And so they made this neutral format or CAD agnostic format called STEP. Probably there isn't a CAD designer in the world that's not made a STEP file these days. It basically was supposed to replace, enhance, improve upon the IGES format, IGES. And so it did that. what happened kind of in this 2016-ish timeframe is a consortium of primarily aerospace aircraft airframe builders, Boeing, Airbus, Parker Hannifin. That group of folks got together and said, we want to put this stuff called PMI, product and manufacturing information. We want to put that connected to that geometry. We want to put that into the model. So let's make a new AP, application protocol. They called it 242, literally because they combined 214 and 203. And if you multiply 14 times 3, you get 42. So yeah, fun fact. So they made this new thing. Now this committee, and it's a committee effort of volunteers across multiple organizations that have come and gone over time. And they're developing ways to attach annotation and attribute data to the geometry that it represents, digitally connecting it together. That's why that's so important. That's what we call 3D data interoperability, is connecting all these disparate pieces together. Now, we only know kind of about geometry, annotations, and attributes today. We know we need that stuff. There'll be other stuff as it grows. So, you know, interoperability standards such as STEP will also continue to grow and evolve over time. So the next stat I have is in 2018, we performed a supplier survey that informed us that at least 50% of the suppliers were ready for MBD in all areas. So maybe that goes along with your 2020 statistic of CEOs saying, we need supply chain, resiliency. And, we actually have data that says, okay, we're ready to kind of, find out what's new and evolve our processes.
Who's not ready? And why aren't they ready?
Very, very niche operations struggle. Let's say they build this one super special part that's a low quantity and low volume, and that's kind of all they do. That's their bread and butter. It's tricky for them to make sort of these bigger process changes because they know how to do one thing really, really well, right? And they do it. So I would say probably through our observations and the feedback that we've seen in surveys and talking with suppliers, that's probably it, is if they just do the one thing and they don't have a broader line, product line that they develop, or, they only do sheet metal. They don't do sheet metal, CNC, and additive manufacturing. You know what I'm saying? Like there's not enough diversity in the products that they build. That could be it.
Do they need to adopt this, or in your mind, is there a class of suppliers that are okay without adopting this technology, or are you more of the mindset that everybody has got some use for this?
Yeah, well, yes, sure. And I'm glad you brought that up, because you will not see in the last 48 minutes, if you go back and listen to this, I never said get rid of drawings, ever. It's just not a thing. You're not going to get rid of drawings 100%. That's such a bullshit metric. And I don't know where it came from and why it showed up, but you're not going to get rid of drawings. What you need to do is take advantage of where the 3D data brings you value to your business. So, if all you do is this one thing, you build cables where they give you a schematic and you cut them to length and there's just a dimension on there and that works, you're going to probably stay drawing based if that's the only thing you ever do. But if you are building really complex 3D gnarly shapes with crazy outside geometry and crazy inside geometry, you have got to use 3D data, because I can guarantee you your drawings are inaccurate. There's no way to actually represent in 2D what you're building. You have to represent it in 3D. They're already machining it based off of 3D planning control of your CNC operations.
Right.
And then to inspect that result as well, you have to have 3D modern tools in order to inspect that information.
Right. And for the companies in between, I mean, there's something to be said of how taking advantage of MBD can really streamline your drawing creation process.
Yeah, it's a little tricky sometimes, and I won't go too deep into it, but if people are going to use MBD to streamline drawing practices, they really have to understand geometric dimensioning and tolerancing in a modern way, not the 1980s way. You've got to understand it the 2009 plus way. And so back to standards, there are ASME standards that define that. There are also ISO standards that define that. You have to understand those standards in order to mathematically produce models and produce drawings that are authored accurately enough to take advantage of the whole loop. That's a really deep dive, though. So
we'll leave that for our next.
We'll leave that for part 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
Yep. Well, I'll kind of bring us back around just to 2019, which it wasn't too long ago, the last good year we all had. And that was that standards for data interoperability are increasing. And this is the year that QIF, the Quality Information Framework, becomes an ISO standard. And this opens the door to bring 3D digital metrology to the world. So now we start mashing up the geometry, the annotations, the metrology requirements and results. We're really starting to connect things together from design, manufacturing, and quality. And then I'll just say, finally, last year at the 2020 AIAG Quality Summit, the focus is on avoiding the cost of poor quality. And this is something we know we can do using MBD 3D data sets. We can definitely avoid bad mistakes.
What's your estimate on what the, given a certain level of adoption of MBD, of the reduction of cost of poor quality could be? I mean, have you done any case studies or research on what that could be?
Well, it's a little tricky because nobody measures it, right? Sometimes we look at scrap rate. So there's some industries that are notorious for having really high scrap rates that we've worked with. And that's something that we have a measurement from the before, so that when we go to model-based, we can see, oh, look, you cut your scrap rate down by 10 to 20%. So that's kind of the metric we use typically. But that's probably something, I need help on from the listeners. What are the cost of poor quality metrics that you're using now that you have today, so that we can figure out how to measure? And then I'd love to do that research project, Ryan. That would be a really good one.
Well, yeah, for all of you listening, I think it'd be interested in finding that out for themselves, or have an idea of what those savings could be. I think that they should definitely reach out to you to see if you can sort of explore that together.
Yep, that'd be great.
I mean, I think just, in general, the way that we're thinking about supply chain, it's like the old way of thinking about it is it's a cost center that needs to be reduced, and you're looking for all these ways that you can sort of like save things. But I think a new way to thinking about it, and I can definitely see how a lot of the conversation fits into it, is, well, now that you have this new capability, yeah, you're going to see some cost savings for sure, just as a result of eliminating the waste and eliminating the time and tightening up that feedback loop. But then once you have this more responsive, agile capability in your supply chain, what can you do? Are you going to be able to take advantage of unforeseen, unforecasted demand? Is some crazy global health crisis going to come along, and you're going to be able to navigate that? Either like put on the brakes or maneuver that more effectively. Not have a year's worth of inventory that you can't partially completed inventory on your shelf, or something like that. So I would say that there's this cost of poor quality is like almost like inexcusable, like in today's world. But I do think there's something, if we can say forecast even further out on this chart, I think it would say something about, being able to take advantage of unforecasted opportunities as well. Well,
remember back at the beginning of this conversation, I said we found between 6 and 20 handoffs in any process change. So when you do a process analysis, of the information exchange,
Mm-hmm.
to the supplier and back and forth. Well, dude, if you're doing that 20 times and it's manual, you definitely got cost of poor quality going on, because we are human beings. We are not digital robots.
Sure.
So you're either spending way too much money checking and validating and double checking and triple checking and quadruple checking. So that's one thing. You're spending way too much money doing that, or you're flat out fat fingering it.
Yeah.
And that's really bad. And you don't know about it until later. And you're just getting lucky.
Yeah,
So
and that's
way to
probably
take luck out of the
happening.
conversation.
Where is that happening? In like email, right?
Oh my God. If I see
Or some kind of threaded discussion, I
buyers
can just
email all this
see it.
data.
I can just see it now. All of the attachments and screenshots and marked up things, and
Yeah,
oh wait, actually this is the wrong drawing number. It was
it happens every day, all day.
Yeah.
Screws up constantly. Imagine like the ulcers the buyers, on both sides of the house are having. They're like, oh crap, did I send that right in email out? And the engineers get requests for new revisions, and then they email it directly to the supplier. Again, shit show.
And we can do so much better. And it's not like what we're talking about is unproven radical technology.
Right.
What we're talking about here is we're ready. We as a sort of like an industry are ready to do it now.
So ready. Yeah, exactly. I'll leave you with this as I wrap up. We're seeing time savings up to 75% in certain processes of the business due to using MBD. And I'll note that threaded through all these investment costs, there needs to be an enterprise level training and upskilling framework in place so that all your people can actually use that data. But of all the digital and MBD assessments I've ever seen, the technology varies, but the need to teach people how to utilize the new way is always present. So MBD can empower suppliers with better data, creating less of a data dump and more of a dialogue.
Awesome.
And finally, change is hard. So be brave, innovative, and thorough, because it does pay off. Or you can just sit around and wait for a miracle to happen as well.
How often have you seen that happen in your experience?
All the time. 100% of the time. But the people doing really hard work, having really hard conversations, being brave, taking risk, both personally within their careers and with the corporation and the resources, it's paying off. But it's scary. I get it.
Scary now. It might be scarier to just do nothing and be like these people in your cartoon. So,
but you won't be happy at the end. you won't have that deep satisfaction and know you've made really great change. So,
Jennifer, do you've got some contact information that we can pass? Oh, there it is, right there.
It is. Yep.
All right. Well, Jennifer, I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
You got me fired up. Lots of improvements that can be had, and hopefully we inspired some of our listeners to either walk into their boss's office or Zoom them and let them know that there's a lot of opportunity for change here, and for our sort of supply chain. The suppliers of the supply chain, encourage you to really engage your buyer companies to see if this is a way that there can be some opportunities for generating some mutual benefit in using this cool technology.
Yep. That's great. Thank you for letting me participate in the conversation. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, it was great having you. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon on another session.
Thanks.